I think we're now live. So yeah, let's get the show on the road. So hello everybody, and welcome to it's October. For some reason I thought it was in November, losing all track of time. October's edition of the Agile Roundabout, and thank you all for joining us this month, and I hope that you're all keeping well. Probably going to get tomatoes thrown at me for saying this, but I can't believe how close we are to Christmas now, and time really does fly. So anyway, back to the present day, and this month we're focusing on building better teams, and to help us explore this particular topic, we've got two really fabulous speakers lined up. So to introduce them both, we've got Mark, who's the Senior Delivery Manager at MadeTech, and then we've got Erin, who's an Agile Coach at Wongdoddy. I hope I've pronounced that right, Erin.
It's actually Duty.
Duty, is it? Right.
Yeah,
So,
it's a great name.
I'm glad I asked you then. So for those first timers, my name's Jonathan, and I run and host this meetup, which is part of a bigger brand called the Roundabouts, and we focus on delving into a multitude of different topics, be it agile or be it engineering or development. So if you've not checked out any of the other roundabouts that we host, definitely check them out. And also, just for your reference as well in the audience, and I'll say this tentatively, we're hoping to get back in person from January, so keep your eyes peeled for our meetup page. So finally, both speakers would love your interaction and participation, so feel free to ask questions throughout, and then once Mark and Erin have both spoken, then I'll get them both back and we'll have a bit of discussion, chew the fat, and answer any questions that you may have. So probably you've fed up of hearing from me, and you're not here to hear from me, so I'll let Mark take it away.
Thanks very much. Let's share my screen. I assume that works. I have no idea of knowing. Oh, there it is. It's working. Yeah. Cool. So thanks everybody for choosing to join and listen to this presentation. So it's called Starting with Success, and it's based around some sort of personal observations and reflections that I've been making about how we look to build teams and how we could possibly get a little bit better at that, or nuance the way that we do that somewhat by concentrating more on what those teams are already good at. So before we get started, I just wanted to do a quick hello and also ask you a quick question. So I do the hello first. So this is me. My name's Mark, as John said. I'm a Senior Agile Delivery Manager based at MadeTech in London. And MadeTech are a public sector delivery expertise agency. We work with a lot of different government departments and local government agencies within the United Kingdom, and help them build transformative technologies, increase their pace of delivery, and also embed greater capabilities within those places. I've worked in some form of delivery now for over a decade, spanning strategy, projects, software, and digital. And I've been specifically working in digital for the last 6 years. And you can see at the bottom there, those are some of the clients that I've worked with. And actually one of those is an in-house agency as well. Outside of work, I like to run. I try my very best to keep plants alive, and I try where I can to go to the football as well. Before we go any further, you don't have to provide any audience feedback here, but I want everybody just to have a quick think about the last time that you were in some sort of retrospective or lessons learned sort of meeting where it looked a little bit like this, a little bit thin on the ground of stuff that went well, plenty of debate going on what hasn't gone well, and then actions sort of homing in on that. That to me feels like a relatively familiar experience. So just to get into a bit of the detail, then I'm going to give you a quick zoom out on an agenda for what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to give a bit of a recap on continuous improvement and what I think continuous improvement is and when we do it. I'm going to look at an alternative approach, or a slightly nuanced way of looking at continuous improvement. I'm going to give some real life examples of where I've tried to put that alternative approach into practice and my various successes and shortcomings as a result of trying to do that. So continuous improvement then, I'm going to try and recap on why we do it at all. So first thing I think it's important to say is that continuous improvement isn't anything new. It's been around for a while, and it's certainly been a part of my career since I've worked in the software development industry. And the concept of doing inspecting and adapting is a massive cornerstone of the Agile Manifesto, and it's right there in the principles of why we do Agile at all. Retrospectives, which are sort of one of the main vehicles, and I'll talk quite a lot about today, are baked into Scrum and Kanban, two of the processes that we probably use the most, and certainly 95% of the projects that I've worked on have operated that. And if you wanted to learn more about continuous improvement, you can 530 million times by typing into Google and seeing a wealth of different ways that you can do continuous improvement more effectively. So, but what actually is continuous improvement? Wikipedia tells me, which actually was my favorite of the definitions, that is an ongoing and incremental effort to improve products, services, and processes, which sounds about right. It's something that we try to do regularly within teams, so inspecting and adapting on some sort of cadence, and we use it to improve the way that we build our products, services, and processes. And so when do we do it? I think we try to do it in our industry all of the time. So I think that there's different elements to this. One is on the deliveries themselves. So we will hold potentially regular retrospectives where we look at what we as a team are doing well and how we can, and what we're struggling with and where we can improve. I think we try to continuously improve the software itself that we build, looking at how we can improve our users' experiences and journeys. And I think we also do it to enhance operations within modern businesses as well. So we, for example, run a weekly delivery team health sort of exercise where we look at which projects are having a particularly good time, which projects are struggling, and we try as best we can to improve the lives and the outcomes of the projects that are having a difficult time. And how do we do it? So I think that continuous improvement as a concept is somewhat of a mindset, and it's something we look to incorporate constantly throughout the way that we work. And certainly some of the smartest people that I've worked with have always had that sort of eye on solutions and looking about how they can do things better. And I think the manifestation of continuous improvement is some sort of root cause analysis. So looking at a thing that's happened and identifying why it happened and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing and how we do more or less of it. And I think one of the things that I'd noticed, and this is where I sort of had originally started thinking about this a few months ago, is that it's quite easy to slip into a trap of always focusing root cause analysis or continuous improvement on the things that aren't going well within our teams. And if you look back to the example that I gave at the start, I think this is sort of a typical reminder for me about why that comes about. I've been in many a retrospective, ones I've facilitated myself, ones where I've been a team member, and ones where I've observed, where this is not an uncommon way to see that root cause analysis go. We spend a very little time talking about the stuff that went well, a patch of thoughts over there. We get a large coalescence of things that aren't going well, and those become our discussion topics, and we go away and try to generate actions around those, and invariably don't always do them. So this has got me thinking that if we always focused on what went wrong and trying to improve our team space solely on that, this could have some shortcomings. So firstly, I think there's a sense that by focusing our vocabulary sort of on human deficit and things that are always going wrong, this could lead to an increased exhaustion with retrospectives and potentially a lack of engagement from people within the team to attend them. And I think building on that, when we look at things that went wrong, we're normally trying to identify what the malfunction was that led to something going wrong. And a malfunction could be a piece of technology, it could be a process or a system, but could also be a human being. And I think human beings are usually the most variable part of any process, and therefore they become seen as the biggest liability. And I think that there's a risk around there, although it's not certain, and a lot of people do a lot of things to avoid this. There's a risk there that you can accidentally generate a blame culture by looking at only your shortcomings. And lastly, I think there's a big thing for me in that someone who is very data-driven and works in an industry that is very data-driven, if we only look at the things that we as a team are not doing well, we're ignoring half of the data that's made available to us. So the example that I like here, and I'll pick up on again later, is if you imagine an engineering plant that has 26 pumps that will pump out water that go into people's homes. If it has 5 pumps that are not working, the common thing to do is to do a lot of root cause analysis on why those 5 pumps aren't working. But this ignores 21/26, whatever that is as a fraction, of the data available. So this got me looking into alternative approaches to the way that we do continuous improvement and think about how we inspect and adapt within teams. And sort of, I suppose, the question that I pose to each of you and to think about myself is, what if we put as much energy into analysing the things that we're good at as the things that we struggle with? And this wasn't the first thing I looked at, but it was something that I sort of came along my journey, was looking at something called Appreciative Inquiry. So there's a whole book around this by a guy called David Cooper-Ryder and Diana Whitney, came out sometime in the 1990s. And they built this theory called Appreciative Inquiry, which teaches us to look at how systems work and how and why they invariably work so well. There's quite a lot of language that I don't necessarily associate within that sort of context, but I think what I've noticed as I did a bit more research on this is that it's actually been applied across a really broad range of industries. So I've seen it, some sort of case studies of it in healthcare, some in engineering, and also some in sport. So Vince Lombardi, who is the one of the most famous American football coaches of all time, even has the Super Bowl named after him now, used to encourage his team to only ever focus on the things that they were doing well and trying to do those even better, rather than worrying too much about the things that they weren't doing well. And I think the things that started to like really make me think that this was something that might be worthwhile considering is some of the language it used. So firstly, it talks about trying to replace spiraling diagnosis. It says with discovery and dreams, but replacing spiraling diagnosis, which is something that I could really associate with that feeling of navel gazing that you can get within teams when things aren't going quite right. And this was a quote that I really liked. It talks about the deliberate, rigorous research into the root causes of success. And I think while I can be pretty confident in claiming that I do make attempts to look at what the things that we as a team have done well in a given period, be it a sprint or whatever it is, I don't think I ever do deliberate and rigorous research into how we did that well. This is my favorite example, and it's from outside the world of software engineering, but I think there's a few parallels there. So this comes from a book called Surfing the Edge of Chaos, which was a Save the Children study that happened in Hanoi in Vietnam after the war. And they were looking at ending malnutrition in children within Hanoi. And the thing that they did was they didn't just look at the children who had that malnutrition. They looked at the children who actually weren't malnourished. So they looked at the positive deviance or the positive deviance within that society. And they found some really simple stuff about the people that were living happy and healthy lives. They were eating more of, I think, with freely available freshwater crab and shrimp. They were eating more vitamin-rich sweet potato leaves, and they were eating at a more regular cadence. And so they took the things that were already going well in Hanoi and they tried to apply those to the communities of people who weren't so well. And they found a massive take up. And I think partly it worked because it was a plan that was come up with by the people of Hanoi themselves as well. But there was a 2/3 reduction in malnutrition within 6 months. And I think the things that feel translatable here to software development is about how we can often take a bird's eye view if we want to and look at the things that we're doing well and try to work out how we can apply those to things where we have troubles rather than just focusing on the problem community in this case. So why might positive deviance or appreciative inquiry work well in our world? So I think the first thing is it does make use of the full data set available. And I think that's one of the things that really charms me about it. It taps into those 21 good actor pumps that I spoke about before, and it encourages to think about the processes that underpin them that might be making them work. So it could be that they've got a particularly good rebuild process, or they're cleaned particularly well, or even that they do root cause analysis differently on those 21 than they did at the 5 when they fail. Secondly, I think it makes it easier to adopt a human-centered approach when it comes to looking at our teams. I don't think it's the only way to do it. And I would caveat a lot of the presentation here with, I think there's a lot of work going on in teams to try and be human-centered all the time. And whether that's the prime directive or the sort of like analogies that run through retrospectives, I think there's a lot of that there. I just think that this approach might work quite well for people like myself who are quite data-driven and solution-driven, to be more human-centered in our approach. And I think the reason for that is it causes a change in mindset to think less about how humans have made things go wrong, but more about how humans are the reason why things actually invariably go right. And it's the flexibility and resilience of humans that makes things work. And lastly, I think this can in turn then build greater trust within our teams and hopefully help them to continuously improve even further and tackle challenges together in the future as well. So I've had a go at putting some of these techniques into practice, and I would say this is very much a work in progress for me and something that I'm still learning about, getting my head around. But I found it interesting nonetheless, and I wanted to share the experiences that I've had with you. So I tried it out in a few settings. I've tried it with product teams in deliveries as part of a retrospective. I've tried it within leadership teams. So I did a retrospective on the leadership team at Maytech. And I've tried it also in delivery operations. And so that delivery operations one is something that I'm particularly passionate about, is looking at a portfolio of deliveries across a region, and understanding why the good ones are working well, and then comparing that to the ones that aren't working so well, and seeing where we can translate that learning. So first of all, putting it into practice with the product team. So this is just a screenshot of a Miro. I'm sure you're all sick to death of seeing these over the last 18 months. And the things I just wanted to point out on here is this is a really simple sort of two-stage process that we followed. So first of all, tried to identify strengths under given headings, such as collaboration. And this is a really like basic reuse of an existing retrospective tool. So if anyone's ever used the Ishikawa fish diagram or the fishbone diagram, it's basically the same thing. It's picking headings and getting people to brainstorm the stuff that we're doing really well at under that. So an example is collaboration. And the team that I was working with came up with an example about how they'd done a particularly good job of increasing collaboration and ways of working with a partner technical team, so a team that supported their infrastructure needs. We then took the most impactful 3 things that we thought were good strengths in the team and ran a how might we style exercise, which again is something that I would do in a normal retrospective. You just turn the linguistics the other way around, say, how might we do more of these? And by doing that, we were able to look at how we might take that collaborative approach that we had with one team and put it out into another, which is something that we're going to try and do more of in the future. But we wouldn't have come to that conclusion if it weren't for the fact that we thought about the thing we were already good at, or we may not have. And secondly, another example of this, of putting it into practice, is in that sort of delivery operations space, and looking at a project that went from a position of things being quite tough for the team on the ground to one that was a much more positive situation. And ordinarily when that happens, I think it's quite common to just forget about it and just accept that it happened and not paying attention to the fact that it was a success. So we started off by looking here at what the big wins were that had got the delivery from being sort of red on its RAG status, as it were, to one that was green. We took the top couple of those and we did a 5 whys exercise to dig into the root cause of 2 of those big wins. For those not familiar with 5 whys, it's a case of you take a thing that's good in this case or bad in other root cause analysis, and you ask why, until you eventually get down to what we think the reason for that was. And that enabled us to come up with some really logical and concrete actions that followed from that root cause that will apply to other projects. The example in this case was the way that we build our sort of core leadership teams in the project is really integral to the way that to the fact that they're successful. And by having the right sort of combination of mindsets of people on the project rather than just logical skills is sometimes really important. So some practical tips that I wanted to just share with you for those of you that are interested. So I think that I learned a few things about how to make these sessions run as smoothly as possible. I think I've probably facilitated 100 retrospectives in my life, but I've never really had this sort of focus before. And so some of these things, although they might seem obvious, to me at least really felt like they were worth calling out. So firstly, I think it's really important to give that sort of zoom out up front and give context and theory sometimes up front to get everyone in the right mindset as to why they're taking part in this. So don't think it necessarily comes naturally to people to think like this. Secondly, try to make use of the tools that you already know exist. So I have mentioned 3 different tools there. How might we, the fishbone diagram and the 5 whys exercise. Those are all things that I've become very familiar with over the last few years of working in software development. And they work just as well in this context as they would in any other. So reuse them, don't try and reinvent the wheel. And lastly, I think it's really important to give people longer than you think you need. It takes more brain power than you might think to come up with things that you're good at and understand why you're good at them. Particularly for people that have got used to being particularly kind of constructive in the way that they give their analysis of themselves. I think it might take longer than you need. So we're coming to the end now. So I just wanted to wrap up with what I think my 3 key takeaways have been from this. And number 1, I think the thing that I've taken from this, and I say we should, and I think in this I actually mean I should, but also I'd encourage you to take what our teams are doing more seriously and think in a bit more depth about when we see a good thing happen, why that's happened, and not just let it go back. And I think if we don't, we're not making full use of the data that we've got available to us within teams. I think secondly, we can rigorously assess the strengths of our teams as easily as our shortcomings. It might just feel unnatural at first, and it might just feel difficult, but it is possible to do it. And thirdly, this isn't just about retrospective. So I've sort of spoken about those quite a lot because they're and root cause analysis, because they're the kind of the vehicle and the mechanism by which it's easy to talk about this, but I think it could easily be applied to all sorts of other significant wins. And the kind of like the example I think about here is whenever I've worked on a project that's successfully released a piece of software on time or met a big deadline, the tendency of us is to get together and have a slice of cake and a glass of champagne and celebrate and get on with our lives, and usually set another deadline very soon after. We should definitely continue to do the cake and the champagne thing, but I think it's also worthwhile thinking that we should sit down and take a minute just to understand why we were able to be successful in that instance. So that is it from me. Thanks very much for listening. These are my details, which I hope will be made available to you if you would like to get in contact, either via email or via LinkedIn. And for anyone who wants to do a little bit more reading of it, these are some of the articles that I've been reading to get my head around this slightly new topic to me. Again, I can share this with anyone who wants it afterwards. That is me done.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. And we'll definitely share all those in us after this event. And what we'll do is, as I mentioned before, we'll bring you back after Erin's done her talk, and we'll go through some of the questions. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Erin now, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. I'm gonna break the format just a little bit, and I'm hoping there should be a screen. There we go. Can see the screen. So one of my favorite things about doing meetups in person that I have missed over the last 2 years has been the ability to basically crowdsource the answers that I'm sure you're all hoping that I was going to give you today on how to sort of create those connections between your teams when you're all feeling remote. So I have got a pen, I have got the chat and the comments open in front of me, and I'm going to start talking, but I really would like some interaction while I am sort of talking through my thoughts. This is not an uncommon thing to anyone anymore, is the idea that all of our teams are very remote. Maybe we don't have people as engaged anymore. And everyone's sort of thinking, how do we make sure that our teams are truly engaged and really high performing and functioning? Particularly as I don't think anyone really wants to go back to the office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday anymore, which is always fun. So I'm going to work around a few ideas here. And the first thing I'm going to say is I don't think this is actually as unusual as we have been saying for the last 2 years. So I've always had at least some element of my team being remote. We live in a super global world. You always have someone who's based offshore. You always have to figure out how to do this. It just feels slightly different because now everyone's in their kitchen, in their office at home, having kids and pets and stuff interrupting. So let's pick a section of my board, and I'm going to start over with this one at the bottom with a capital T, and I feel like it follows on very nicely to what Mark was saying about retrospectives and creating a sense of safety, etc., is trust. So the big element of creating a high-performing team in any sort of situation is how to build that element of team trust. And one of the things that we're really struggling with these days is how do we actually do this while we are remote? So trust comes in two elements. Trust comes from a people perspective and trust comes from a work perspective. So let's just look at this at work, right? So if we're thinking about trust with our performing teams, what we're going to think about is delivery. So how do we make sure that our teams are delivering, and how are they able to deliver, and are they keeping their promises? Now, we're obviously looking at our retrospectives and we're obviously looking at our metrics, but we're going to think planning. Are we actually able to do the same sort of work that we used to be able to do when we are completely remote? Do we have the access to the tools? One of the first things we used to have to think about, one of the things we started thinking about in March 2020 was internet. We used to have to start giving people additional funds and stuff in some of my places to make sure that they still had access. So when we have a proper planning in place, when we have proper work in place, we can then start delivering work. We can then start looking at our promises. We can then start delivering trust. If we do not have this high trust element and we do not embody it, we're going to have this sense where we have no sense of direction. So how do we build direction in our team? It is more than just your sprint planning. We're all agile people. We all know that planning is the most important thing, and failure to plan is just failure, full stop. But sense of direction is a really important thing. Who has heard of OKRs? Who uses OKRs? Who uses North Star? Anything like that? I'm sort of looking at the comments, hoping someone's going to chat back at me, but if not, that's okay. With our teams, we want to set a strong sense of vision. We want strong goals. We want these constantly looked at. We want these at a company level, not just a team level. We want to know that what we are doing has a real impact in the work that we are delivering, on the wider world, on the direction of the company. If we don't have a direction as a team, we're not going to go anywhere. We're not going to really have that connection with each other, and we're just going to sit at our screens clicking away at code, clicking away on Jira boards, and not really having that connection and trust. When our direction has been set at a high level, we're obviously going to look at breaking this down. We need to actually track this. If we don't track this and we don't track it usefully, people are just going to get lost in the woods. When we were in an office together and we had the ability to sit and chat and overhear what people are working on, we could course direct naturally. We can't do that anymore. So people like me, when we're on one side of the screen, what we're going to have to do is spend way more time talking to people about what you're actually doing and how is that fitting into your North Star direction. If you haven't started putting it into your retrospectives, actually looking back and going, when we're looking at our feature and we've got our little board, and we're like this way through, this percentage of the way through our feature delivery, if we're not going, this ticket leads up to this massive feature and we're actually seeing progress, people are just going to start picking random stuff. I know it sounds really obvious, but it's amazing how often people get to miss this. And we need to make sure that we're constantly keeping our map on track. I see Tony has said he started working with teams with OKRs. Be very interested to know, Tony, if those are working for you, because I would love to see more people using these really, really well and really accurately, because it's not meant to be a stick. It's meant to be a carrot. It is meant to inspire rather than smack, smack, smack. So if we have our direction and we have our trust and we are delivering the way we say we're going to deliver, belonging. When we're all in an office together, there are things that we can do to create a sense of belonging. It is a lot easier to bring people into your unit when you start off. So you can start going out to the pub, you can do social stuff. I actually got to see my team on a social last night for the first time in 2 years. It was amazing. But how do we do this remotely? And this goes right back to the beginning, and we're looking at recruitment. So when we are thinking about making sure we have a sense of belonging in our team, we're thinking about the culture of the people that we're hiring as well. Now, that's not saying we need to hire everyone that thinks like me, looks like me, and acts like me, but we might want to be thinking about how do we make sure that we are bringing people in who are going to extend that hand to everyone else who's offshore. We're also going to want to have a look at things like, how do we do our onboarding remotely? Now, I am in a joyous situation where I have remotely onboarded into 2 separate companies over the pandemic, both of which are consultancies, which means I've had to onboard into multiple different clients completely remotely over the last few years. If you manage to do your remote onboarding well, you are winning this game. It is really, really tricky to do. It's so easy to just give people all of the information about where they can log in to do things and just send people a deck with your company hierarchy. That's not going to cut it. What you maybe want to be thinking about is, actually, you may only come to the office once a month. So let's send you a little video going, here's what the office looks like. Maybe you want to be thinking about, for those people who are coming into the office and now recreating a sense of culture, what things socially are we doing? And I'm not just talking about alcohol, we're talking, I don't know, coffee clubs. Making sure that people have that space and that energy to do that. I'm also going to say what we're going to think about here is our introverts. A lot of people over the last couple of years have actually really enjoyed working from home because they get to have quiet space if they're not naturally extroverted and don't like to sign up for things like this, which is great. But we want to make sure that they're not feeling lost anymore when we come back to hybrid working and everyone's packed into the office. If we are all starting to go back into the office again and everything's loud and crazy and we're mandating you have to come in every Wednesday and Friday for whatever reason, we want to make sure we get that right balance for the people who want to have that quiet time and that away space. There may be an element of considering actually your team contract. And I'm not talking legally. I'm sure many of you at some point have done things like team charters, but your team social contract should add things like, actually, who am I in relation to the team? And then just spend time with your team. one of my Scrum Masters has started doing this great thing with one of our teams where every one of our retrospectives is themed because we like to mix it up. So she comes up with a weird icebreaker question for every single one of them. So, what ideal superpower would you have? We were stuck on a desert island. And what were the 3 items you want to bring? Anything like that to try and get to know the team and build that sense of connection, I would. And we also have online gaming functions. Make use of them. If anyone wants to set up a chess tournament in their company, let me know how that goes. Okay, let's come over to ownership. We're back to the work. Ownership when you are a remote team is one of the most important aspects, and empowering your teams to feel like they have full ownership over their work and their productive time is incredibly important. This is one where I might end up having the tech folks of the world yelling at me because it's not always this easy, but let's see. Anything you can do to empower people to make changes easily and quickly that can then be rolled back will probably make your life so much easier and make a more productive team and more gel team. We are looking at what GitHub like to call the MVC, which is the minimum viable change. How quickly can we push this out? How often can we make sure that we have solid branching strategies? How much can our teams make real decisions over the work that they're doing is incredibly important. If you have someone micromanaging a completely remote team, you're never going to see their face ever again. You want to make sure those teams really, really feel a sense of ownership over their work, but also a sense of ownership around their team. It's a very strange way to describe that, but it's how we connect. They're our team, they're our people, they're our little pot of work, and it's a really, really amazing thing. How we do this is we give them the space to make decisions over maybe the backlog, over the tooling, over the ways of working, all that stuff that you've put into the contract. You shouldn't mandate any of this. Once they have a real sense of ownership over that, we're going back down to our little trust with a capital T over here, because all of this stuff embodies that trust. And if the team don't really have that high connection, you're going to really, really struggle, and it's going to be like talking to a brick wall. I've got 2 more. The tooling one. There are so many different ways to do things. I could have come today with a PowerPoint presentation and just talked you through my thoughts, and that could have done. And you know what? That might have been way better, but I thought I'd give this a go. I would explore your tools as much as possible and talk to your teams, because some people will really, really have very strong opinions over whether they use Mural or Miro, and I don't really understand why. But let those teams make those decisions over what they want to do. Try everything. If it fails, it fails, because that's fine. That's so important just to give this a go. But tooling is a really interesting one when you talk about teams. So your chat function is probably going to be a point of contention at some point, because someone will hate Teams and someone will hate Slack. But give things a go. One of the things that I have tried recently with one of my teams, which worked really well, actually was Discord. We used it for a hackathon day. Everyone loved it. And now they're absolutely begging me to bring it into everything, because it's one of the fastest quick reaction call functions that they've ever been able to use. And it felt more natural, like if they were in a desk environment. So you're able to drop into a voice channel, have a chat with your team, have a chat with your teammate, and run away again. It felt more like actually popping by someone's desk to ask them a question, rather than set up a call, get them to join, connection issues, try and share your screen, give things a go. Anyone who has a ICT company or a part of their company that really, really dislikes having lots of tooling, they're going to really hate me, but literally options. That fatigue that Mark was talking about in terms of your retrospective formats and people getting really bored of seeing the same thing over and over again, it's the same with your tools. So the more you get to mix things up, the more you try things, the more likely people are going to engage. And you're going to, again, have something that feels a little bit more natural when it comes to creating a high-performing team completely remotely. And then, obviously, you're going to have to make some sense of allowance. When I say make some sense of allowance, it doesn't matter if you've got the most high-powered internet on the planet, something is going to crash at some point. So when you're thinking about bringing people on board with their new communication or collaboration tools, make sure you're allowing for a delay in the system and letting people just try things. And that's going to bring me to my last point, and hopefully have a little extra time for Q&A for both myself and Mark. But failure is super important. Failure has been important when it comes to teams and making a high performing team in every situation, but it's particularly important in remote. It is so much easier to hide from mistakes and learning opportunities when you can just turn off your screen and no one can see you. So what we really need to do is start getting people to really own up to any failures and mistakes they've made and how we can actually fix that. And one of the most amazing things, and I'm sorry, Jonathan and Beth, I'm about to talk about another meetup, but one of the most amazing things that I've ever seen and I absolutely love are the concept of a fuck up night. And you literally get people to come in and own their mistakes, as ridiculous or insane as they are, and ask them what they've learned from that situation and really celebrate it. Pre-remote working days, I've heard at companies where people got an award for the biggest failure of the month, and it was something that people actually were looking forward to, just to see who's made the biggest mess up this month and what went wrong and how do we fix it. As someone leading a remote team, this is going to be extra work for you right now, but I think it's really important because you need to go and find the fail. And I would encourage during your daily stand-ups, maybe once a week, just asking for something that's gone wrong this week and what we've learned from it, or asking people what they've learned this week. And once we start getting the idea that everything doesn't have to be perfect, and we don't have to have things going exactly the way they were in 2018 when things functioned, we can start talking more about our more substantial failures, shall we say. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to stop scribbling and giving you vertigo by scribbling around this. I don't know if Jonathan and Mark have any thoughts of what they would put on my little scribble page.
Back. So it's very, very interesting what you said, especially given what I do on a day-to-day basis in terms of and the onboarding process needs to be spot on, and it's been very interesting hearing and learning how different companies have been automating this and I suppose testing the waters during this. So yeah, that was really interesting. So before we go on to some of the questions, and if you do have questions, then please feel free. We've got quite a few, and we'll get through those in a second. But just wanted to give Erin and Mark a chance, I suppose, to ask each other some questions if they had any from each of their presentations. So Mark, I'll go with you if you had any questions for Erin based on her.
I actually don't think I have a particularly great deal to ask. I was going to leave it to the wider audience. I thought that was great. I really enjoyed the format. I thought it was great.
It's something I wanted to try and see if it worked. So ignoring my slight panic earlier when I couldn't get the screens to share, I quite enjoy doing things like this. I miss putting Post-it notes on walls when I do
very nice
meetups.
And Erin, did you have from Mark's talk? Did you have anything you'd like to ask him?
I do have a slight advantage that I find this on my bookshelf, which is the Made Tech Performing Teams book, and I'm wondering, do you still do the big large company format retrospectives that you once wrote about there?
So I've worked for Made Tech since May, so not the greatest historical context that I could give there. But and the company's grown an awful lot in the last 18 months, and is now based in London, Bristol, and Manchester. I think we might struggle to do a large. Yeah.
If you ever do one of those, I'd love to hear how that goes at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
So on the questions, I suppose James and Lee's question is sort of on a similar vein, and so James asked, how did your leadership team react / engage with this activity, and is it something they found value in and likely to continue? And then Lee, on a similar vein, asks about what challenges did you encounter from the leadership team?
So I think that first of all, they were super happy to engage with it. They have retrospectives, I think once a month at Made Tech, and they're always looking for people to do guest slots. And when I told them I was looking to try this method out for purpose of a meetup, they were particularly pleased to have someone come in and do it. I think that they actually gave some of the most useful feedback afterwards as well, and I think that a lot of that was around how I think that one of the things that they probably would have liked a bit more time to do, and that's where my time part came in the practical tips bit, is have a bit of time to work out, like almost do like the side-by-side comparison of things that aren't going well and things that we could therefore do to leverage it. And I think that they found it harder to get to value as a result of like sort of starting from a clean slate. I think what I learned in that is it's a lot easier to do it with teams who are meeting every 2 weeks and are having that conversation, and they're having conversations about the same things every 2 weeks, because they're able to much more easily reflect on that, and they've got basically got a broader set of data to draw upon. Whereas I think for leadership teams who are completely flat and new, it was harder to get to actions. And I think that was the feedback that I sort of got from them, is like, for this, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to say that thing about giving it the time, is like, for this to be taken seriously as a methodology, I think it has to result in as good actions as you get from any other retro. Otherwise it's going to fall on its feet.
Cool. And we've got a question from Rob, I think, again for you, Mark. I think from the comments, I think he knows you. He mentioned he's an old friend of yours. So he said, when focusing on this, have you experienced situations where things that are not going so well get worse? And he says that don't think they should be totally ignored in favor of what's going well.
Totally agree with Rob, who is an old friend of mine and a wonderful karaoke singer. He's dead right. And I think that was one of the things that I didn't put in the presentation. I actually had it on one of the slides and took it out in the end. But I think that where I found that this has worked better is if you just get a bit of a better balance. And I think that like there was like the 2 times in the presentation where I asked a question of like, could it be harmful to always do this? Would it be interesting if we tried to put all our energy into the opposite approach? And like often what's right is like the 3 little bears, isn't it? Of like the just right approach of doing a bit of both. And I think what I've been trying to do now is on a regular basis, like splitting it right down the middle, and rather than sort of encouraging everyone to think about things that have gone well and not gone well all together and then having a conversation about it, like just split it down the middle and say, we're not going to talk about anything that's not gone well yet for the next half an hour, and focusing really on that. And I think that's probably like a better compromise. And I think for someone like myself who finds it more difficult to like really talk about the positive sometimes in teams, like applying the same techniques that you would do to solve the problems, like to understand why you're doing the things well, has been really helpful for me.
Cool. And just going on from Erin, what you were saying about OKRs, and there seems to be a few people who've mentioned about OKRs, and Anna mentioned that it's definitely more stick than carrot. But I suppose it'd be good to hear from both of you, and we'll go with Erin first. What, in your opinion, how best should a company implement OKRs, and if they've not done so before?
So I think OKRs have had the same casualty. I think that Agile it's become so widely spoken about. It's a buzzword. And I think that's where we need to start if you want to start implementing something like an OKR or a North Star format, is actually understanding the purpose and the mindset behind it. It's not meant to be you must hit this goal stringent thing. It's meant to stretch people. And so the 2 dangers I've seen the most are either people think this is a delivery minimum standard, which is not what it's meant to be. It's meant to be challenging but achievable. And then the other side of it is you really shouldn't have 1,001 OKRs. And I know it's very, very difficult for organizations to whittle down to a few things, but if you can't whittle down to a few things, you don't really have that single sense of direction that you need for teams to really perform well. So I don't want to put a number on it, but I generally try and keep it below 5, at least. So yeah, I think that's the 2 mistakes that a lot of places make initially. And then after that, it's just good hygiene on making sure that they're regularly reviewed.
And what about your thoughts, Mark, on this?
I would agree with that, basically. I think that I would do OKRs if that's what you think is the best thing to help you as a team or an organization get to where you want to be. I wouldn't do it if it's because Google does it. And I think that's the same with the Spotify model, right? Like, and I think that's another casualty. Like, so I think it's about doing it when it's the right thing to do. And I think the other thing that I'd add on to Erin's point about the volume of them that you do, I think that another thing I see go wrong often is like the temporalness of them, like how long they're like sort of set for, or like how far into the future you're intending to try and hit that outcome. And often see like a lot of like continuous improvement go on in a really like short-term fixed 3-month period. Then I struggle to like really see it through over the longer term. So I think that I broadly agree and just add that on as well.
And final question we seem to have is from Hamid. So I think this is for you, Erin. So he's asking about the difficulties in team management, and I suppose how you counter it before it becomes worse.
So I fundamentally approach all sort of team management as not really management. I guess I am the poster child for the servant leader sort of mindset. And I think that is probably where I see the biggest difficulty and the biggest sort of fail stories is when people go in and assume that the team needs someone to tell them what to do. I'm not a developer. I'm not a designer. I work with very clever developers and designers. I need them to tell me. And I need to hold myself accountable. So when I start talking about trust with the team, if I don't follow through in the things that I say I'm going to do to help them, or at least give them a reasonable reason why I can't, they're never going to trust me and do the same. So I think you need to approach teams from a human perspective and try and go from there. Because if you don't, and it becomes a us versus them scenario, it's really hard to come back from that.
Cool. And I suppose finally, I don't know if you had anything to add from that, Mark.
No, I think that Erin nailed that.
Thank
Great.
you.
Well done.
That's definitely praise indeed, Erin. Well, I'd like to obviously thank Erin and Mark for giving up their evening to speak on the Agile Roundabout, and as mentioned, really hope that we can get back to these in-person events starting next year, and I'm sure Erin and Mark will be there on in some of them, and so for future events, please keep an eye on our meetup page. And so from myself, from Erin, from Mark, and big shout out to Cleaner, who steps in for Beth last minute on the back end. So thank you, Cleaner, for doing that. Hope you're all keeping safe, and look forward to hopefully seeing some of you in person in the new year. So from myself, Mark, and Erin, hope you have a good evening, and look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.